My name is Lynn Parker, 32 years old, and senior investment analyst at one of the most prestigious firms in New York City. That Tuesday morning was supposed to be career-defining. We had a meeting with a mysterious billionaire client whose $200 million deal would make or break our fiscal year. I arrived 15 minutes late because I stopped to help an elderly janitor. As I rushed in, my boss, Richard, sighed. "Glad you could join us." Little did he know that simple act of kindness would change everything. If you have ever been unfairly judged at work, drop a comment below about where you are watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to see how this unfolded. Looking back, I should have seen the signs much earlier. After graduating with my MBA from Harvard 8 years ago, I had been laser-focused on climbing the corporate ladder at Hamilton and Reed Investment Partners. My days were long, starting at 5 in the morning and often ending well past 9 at night. Weekends. Those were just another opportunity to get ahead of Monday meetings. Vacations were rare luxuries I could seldom afford time-wise despite the generous compensation package. Hamilton and Reed was not just any financial firm. Occupying 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in Manhattan, it managed over $15 billion in assets for some of the wealthiest clients in the world. The marble lobby, the floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of Central Park, the original artwork adorning the walls, everything was designed to whisper exclusivity and success to anyone who walked through our doors. My immediate boss, Richard Hayes, was what many would call a nightmare supervisor, though we all pretended otherwise. At 45, he had already climbed to executive vice president status through what many whispered were connections rather than competence. Richard was obsessed with status symbols, from his custom-made Italian suits to his collection of luxury watches that he rotated daily. More than once, I had seen him check the brand of a colleague's accessories before deciding how much attention to pay to their ideas. In this business perception is reality, Lynn was his favorite phrase, usually delivered while adjusting his tie or checking his reflection in any available surface. Clients need to see success to believe in success. What Richard lacked in authentic leadership, he made up for with a terrifying ability to claim credit for successes and distribute blame for failures. His annual bonus depended on the performance of our team, and he made sure we never forgot it. The company culture at Hamilton and Reed mirrored Richard's values. Weekly performance metrics were publicly displayed. Bottom performers were subjected to what management euphemistically called improvement discussions, but were really humiliating dressing downs. The unofficial motto might as well have been profit over people, though our marketing materials spoke eloquently about partnership and client-focused solutions. That spring, news had circulated that a mysterious billionaire was looking for a new firm to manage a $200 million investment portfolio. Landing this client would mean enormous commissions, bonuses for everyone involved, and almost certainly promotions. The executive floor was buzzing with excitement and anxiety in equal measure. "This is the opportunity of a decade," our CEO Graham Wilson had announced during an all-hands meeting. "The team that secures this client will be setting themselves up for extraordinary success." Richard had immediately volunteered our division. "My team has the best closing rate in the company," he had boasted. "We will deliver this client." What followed were weeks of intense preparation. Late nights became all-nighters. Richard demanded dozens of revisions to our presentation decks, market analyses, and investment proposals. Every detail was scrutinized, from the weight of the paper our materials were printed on to the specific temperature the conference room should be set at. "This client is known to be eccentric," Richard told us. During one midnight strategy session, "He tests potential partners in unusual ways. We need to be prepared for anything." The day before the big meeting, Richard had called me into his office. "Lynn, I want you handling the ethical investing portion of the presentation," he said, not looking up from his computer. "Your bleeding heart approach actually works for this section, but keep it brief. The real meat is in the returns projections." I had nodded, swallowing the retort that my bleeding heart approach had actually secured 3 major clients in the past year. Fighting with Richard was never productive. I had learned to pick my battles, and this was not one worth engaging in. The morning of the meeting started as a disaster. My alarm failed to go off, leaving me with barely enough time to shower and throw on the suit I had thankfully laid out the night before. Rushing to grab coffee from my kitchen, I knocked over the mug, spilling it all over my countertop. No time to clean it up properly. I just threw some paper towels on the mess and promised myself I would deal with it later. The subway was delayed due to signal problems, turning my usual 20-minute commute into a 45-minute ordeal of standing pressed against strangers while watching the minutes tick by on my watch. By the time I finally reached our building, I was already 10 minutes late for our pre-meeting briefing with Richard. The actual client meeting was scheduled to start in 15 minutes, which meant I had exactly zero margin for error. Racing through the lobby, I jabbed repeatedly at the elevator button, silently willing it to arrive faster. My heart was pounding, and I could feel stress sweat forming despite the cool air conditioning. Richard was going to be furious, and he had a talent for making public examples of team members who disappointed him. As the elevator numbers slowly descended toward the lobby level, I mentally rehearsed my apologies and explanations, knowing that none of them would satisfy Richard. This was the most important meeting of the quarter, possibly the year, and I was going to walk in late and unprepared. In our world, there were few professional sins more serious. Just as the elevator finally announced its arrival with a soft chime, I heard the sound of metal clattering against marble. Turning my head, I saw an elderly janitor trying to maneuver an overloaded cleaning cart across the lobby. As I watched, several bottles of cleaning solution toppled off the cart, rolling in different directions across the polished floor. The janitor, a man who appeared to be in his late 60s with silver hair and weathered hands, let out a soft sigh of frustration. He carefully parked the cart and began slowly bending down to retrieve the fallen items, his movements suggesting the kind of joint pain that comes from decades of physical labor. Looking at my watch, I knew that stopping to help would make me even later. Richard's voice echoed in my head. In this business, every minute costs money. The elevator doors slid open, offering me an escape from this moral dilemma. I could step inside, press the button for our floor, and pretend I had never seen the struggling man. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of my grandfather who had worked as a maintenance man well into his 70s to help put me through college. Maybe it was simple human decency, a quality that seemed in increasingly short supply in the cutthroat environment of Hamilton and Reed. "Excuse me," I called to the elevator occupants. "Could you hold it, please?" Before they could respond, I had already turned away and was walking quickly toward the janitor. "Let me help you with that," I said, kneeling down in my expensive suit to gather several bottles that had rolled under a decorative table. The janitor looked up, surprise evident in his warm brown eyes. "Oh, thank you, miss, but you do not have to. I can manage." His accent was subtle but noticeable, perhaps Eastern European. "It is no problem at all," I replied, already collecting the scattered supplies. "It will go faster with two of us." Working together, we quickly retrieved all the fallen items and reorganized his cart. I noticed that several of the supplies were precariously balanced, likely to fall again. "Would you like help getting this to where it needs to go?" I offered, glancing at my watch. I was now 12 minutes late for the pre-meeting. "If it is not too much trouble," he said hesitantly. "The storage room is just down that hallway. My name is Martin, by the way." "Lynn," I replied with a smile. "Let me take this end of the cart." As we navigated through the back hallway toward the storage area, Martin spoke softly. "You are the first person in this building to offer help," he said. "Most people here, they look through me, not at me, as if I am invisible." "That is terrible," I responded, genuinely disturbed by this revelation, though not entirely surprised. "How long have you been working here?" "At this building only a few weeks," Martin explained. "But I have been a janitor in this city for many years. 3 jobs currently to support my family." 3 jobs. I could not hide my shock. "That must be exhausting." Martin shrugged. "My granddaughter is starting college next year. First in our family, worth every aching muscle." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and I felt a pang of shame thinking about how often I complained about my own workload, despite my comfortable salary and single job. We reached the storage room, and I helped him secure the cart in its designated space. "Thank you again, Miss Lynn," Martin said earnestly. "Kindness is rare in this building. People here, they rush so much they forget to be human sometimes." His observation struck me as profoundly true. When had I last taken time to really see the people around me, especially those in service positions? I am usually rushing too, I admitted. But maybe we all need to slow down sometimes. It was nice meeting you, Martin. Perhaps I can bring you coffee sometime. His face brightened. I would like that. I am usually on the 40th floor in the mornings. With a final smile, I glanced at my watch and felt my stomach drop. I was now 15 minutes late for the pre-meeting, which meant the client meeting was about to start without me. Rushing back to the lobby, I jabbed at the elevator button repeatedly, my brief moment of human connection giving way to renewed anxiety. As the elevator ascended toward our offices on the 42nd floor, I tried to compose myself. My suit was slightly wrinkled from kneeling on the floor, and a small smudge of cleaning solution had transferred to my sleeve. There was no time to fix these imperfections. I would have to walk into the meeting room exactly as I was and face whatever consequences awaited. The elevator doors opened onto our floor, and I hurried down the hallway toward our main conference room, heart pounding in my chest. Through the glass walls, I could see that everyone was already seated. Richard was standing at the head of the table, gesturing toward a presentation on the large screen. And at the far end, with his back to the door, sat who I presumed was our potential client. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door, prepared to face Richard's wrath. The conversation in the room died instantly as I entered. 8 pairs of eyes turned to look at me, ranging from curious to disappointed, to, in Richard's case, openly furious. "Glad you could join us," Richard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The slight emphasis on join made it clear that my tardiness had not gone unnoticed. His perfectly tailored suit and immaculate appearance seemed designed to highlight my slightly disheveled state. "I apologize for being late," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "There was an issue in the lobby that I needed to assist with." Richard's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Well, now that Miss Parker has deemed us worthy of her presence, perhaps we can continue with our presentation." The conference room was our largest and most impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, and leather chairs surrounded it, each position equipped with a personalized portfolio containing our presentation materials. Electronic displays showing real-time market data lined one wall, while another displayed the Hamilton and Reed logo and mission statement. Seated around the table were the key players from our firm: Graham Wilson, our CEO, looking immaculate in a charcoal gray suit; Sandra Mitchell, our Chief Financial Officer; Thomas Chen, head of our international division; and 3 other senior executives whose presence indicated just how important this potential client was. At the far end of the table sat the mysterious client, still, with his back partially turned toward me, as he examined something on the presentation screen. I couldn't see his face, only the back of his head and his expensive-looking suit. As I was saying before we were interrupted, Richard continued, pointedly looking at me. "Hamilton and Reed has a proven track record of exceeding client expectations, particularly for individuals in your wealth bracket." I quietly made my way to the only empty seat, pulling out my tablet to quickly catch up on what I had missed. As I sat down, Richard paused his presentation again. "Perhaps you would like to explain to our distinguished guest exactly what was so important that it caused you to miss the first 15 minutes of this meeting." His tone made it clear. This was not a request, but a demand, a public punishment, for my transgression. All eyes turned to me again. My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but I maintained eye contact with Richard. "I was helping one of the building's janitors who had dropped some supplies in the lobby," I explained, trying to keep my voice matter-of-fact. "He needed assistance getting them to the storage room." There was a moment of silence, and then Richard let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Well, I hope that janitor appreciates that he was worth potentially jeopardizing a $200 million deal," he said, looking around the table, as if inviting others to join in his amusement. To my dismay, several of the executives chuckled. Thomas Chen smiled thinly and shook his head. Sandra Mitchell looked down at her papers, neither participating in the mockery nor defending me. I did not realize common courtesy had a price tag, I said, before I could stop myself immediately regretting the words, as Richard's expression hardened. At this level, Lynn, everything has a price tag, he replied coldly. Some of us prioritize million-dollar deals over whatever distraction caught your eye. But thank you for reminding us all of your unique approach to time management. More chuckles around the table. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, a mixture of humiliation and anger. The injustice of being mocked for a simple act of kindness stung deeply, but I knew any further defense would only make the situation worse. Throughout this exchange, our potential client remained silent, still examining the presentation on the screen. Not once did he turn around or acknowledge the uncomfortable scene playing out behind him. Now, if we could return to matters that actually deserve our attention, Richard said dismissively, clicking to the next slide in his presentation. I opened the portfolio in front of me, trying to focus on the materials while fighting the burning sensation of embarrassment. Years of professional training helped me maintain a neutral expression, but inside I was seething. This was classic Richard, using my minor infraction as an opportunity to assert dominance and entertain the other executives at my expense. What bothered me most wasn't the humiliation itself, but the values it revealed. In what world was helping an elderly man somehow worthy of ridicule, when had basic human decency become something to mock rather than celebrate? As Richard droned on about return on investment projections and exclusive access to emerging markets, I found myself wondering if this was really the environment I wanted to succeed in. For 8 years, I had accepted the cutthroat culture as simply how things are in high finance. But in this moment, being publicly shamed for an act of kindness, something felt fundamentally wrong. I glanced around at my colleagues, noting how none had come to my defense. These were people I had worked alongside for years, sharing late nights and celebrating wins together. Yet, when it mattered, they had chosen to align with power rather than principle. The realization was both illuminating and deeply disappointing. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to refocus on the meeting. Regardless of Richard's behavior, this was still a potentially career-defining presentation, and I had a role to play. My section on ethical investing was coming up soon, and I was determined to deliver it flawlessly, if only to prove that my professionalism remained intact, despite Richard's attempts to undermine me. As Richard wrapped up his overview of our firm's history and capabilities, I straightened my posture and prepared my notes. Whatever happened in this meeting, I would not let Richard's pettiness diminish my performance or my dignity. Richard was now in full performance mode, his earlier irritation with me seemingly forgotten, as he enthusiastically outlined Hamilton and Reed's impressive portfolio performance statistics. Last quarter alone, our premium clients saw returns averaging 18% above market, he declared, gesturing to a chart with dramatic upward trajectories. While others were celebrating 10% gains, our clients were nearly doubling that figure. I noticed that he conveniently omitted mentioning the higher risk profiles of those particular investments, but saying so would only earn me another public rebuke. At Hamilton and Reed, we understand that at your level of wealth, ordinary investment strategies simply do not suffice. Richard continued, directing his remarks to the back of our potential client's head. You need exclusive opportunities, deals that never reach the public market. I tried to focus on Richard's presentation, but my stomach was still churning from the earlier humiliation. The familiar symptoms of anxiety were creeping in slightly sweaty palms, a tightness in my chest, the sense that everyone could see through my professional facade to the insecurity beneath. 8 years in this cutthroat industry, and I still had not developed the thick skin that seemed to come naturally to my colleagues. Richard clicked to a new slide showing a yacht alongside a private island. This is the lifestyle our clients expect and deserve, and we deliver it consistently. As he moved to the side of the screen to emphasize a particular point, our mysterious client finally began to turn around in his chair. My heart stopped. Sitting at the head of the table, now dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit instead of a janitor's uniform, was Martin. The same Martin I had helped in the lobby 15 minutes ago. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of recognition in his, though his expression remained neutral. My mind raced back through our interaction. Martin the janitor, Martin with the Eastern European accent, and the granddaughter starting college. Martin who had said kindness is rare in this building. It had been him all along. The billionaire client we had spent weeks preparing for had been working as a janitor in our building. Was it possible that no one else had recognized him? But then, as Martin had pointed out, most people in the building looked through service workers rather than at them. With sudden clarity, I recalled hearing rumors about this particular investor, how he was known for testing potential business partners in unconventional ways, how he valued character over credentials. Richard had even mentioned it. He tests potential partners in unusual ways. My revelation was interrupted by Richard's voice. "Lynn, are you with us? It is time for your portion of the presentation." Snapping back to attention, I realized everyone was looking at me expectantly. I had completely missed Richard's transition to my section. "Yes, of course," I said, standing and moving to the front of the room. As I passed Martin, our eyes met briefly. There was no smile, no acknowledgement of our earlier meeting. His face remained impassive, giving away nothing. Taking my position at the presentation screen, I pulled up my slides on ethical investing, a section that Richard had only included, reluctantly, and had instructed me to keep brief and unemotional. While performance metrics are undeniably important, I began deliberately choosing not to rush through, as Richard had instructed. Long-term investment success is increasingly linked to ethical considerations. I advanced to a slide showing the performance of companies with strong environmental, social, and governance practices. These numbers demonstrate that companies prioritizing sustainable practices and ethical treatment of employees and communities often outperform their counterparts in the long run. They face fewer regulatory penalties, experience less turnover, and build stronger brand loyalty. As I spoke, I noticed Martin leaning forward slightly, his interest seemingly piqued for the first time since the presentation began. "At Hamilton and Reed," I continued, momentarily faltering as I considered whether I was representing the firm honestly. "We believe that profit and principle can coexist, that the best investments are those that create value not just for shareholders but for society as a whole." Even as the words left my mouth, I thought of how Richard had mocked me minutes earlier for helping Martin. How disconnected my statement was from the reality of our firm's culture. Miss Parker. Martin spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same Eastern European accent I had heard in the lobby. "You speak of ethical considerations. In your experience, does Hamilton and Reed apply these same principles to how it treats people within its own organization?" The question hung in the air like a suspended weight. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly displeased by this unexpected line of inquiry. "We strive to," I began diplomatically, but something in Martin's steady gaze compelled me toward greater honesty. "Though like many financial institutions, we sometimes prioritize results over relationships." Martin nodded thoughtfully. "And this prioritization, it creates the culture you wish to project to clients." Before I could respond, Richard smoothly interjected. "If I may," he said, stepping forward to reclaim control of the presentation. "While Miss Parker's section on ethical investing is certainly a component of our approach, the real strength of Hamilton and Reed lies in our unparalleled access to exclusive investment opportunities." Richard quickly advanced past my remaining slides to his section on upcoming deals. "These are the opportunities that will grow your $200 million into $400 million within 18 months. Opportunities available only to our most valued clients." The tension in the room was palpable as Richard continued his pitch, emphasizing luxury exclusivity and wealth accumulation. Other executives began chiming in, perhaps sensing Richard's desire to move past my presentation quickly. "People like us understand that exceptional wealth requires exceptional strategies," Thomas Chen offered smoothly. "Our clients enjoy a level of service and access that frankly 99% of the population cannot even imagine," added Sandra Mitchell with a practiced smile. I returned to my seat, increasingly uncomfortable with the tone of the presentation. Every statement seemed to reinforce an us versus them mentality, positioning wealth as not just a financial condition, but a mark of inherent superiority. Throughout these remarks, Martin's expression remained unreadable. Occasionally he would glance in my direction, his eyes revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Richard concluded his portion with a flourish, emphasizing once again the exclusivity of Hamilton and Reed, Martin finally spoke up. "And what would you say is the foundational principle of your firm, Mr. Hayes? What is the one value that drives all others?" Richard did not hesitate. "Excellence, Mr. Reeves. Uncompromising excellence in everything we do." Martin nodded slowly, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Excellence. An admirable goal." He turned slightly in his chair. "And you, Miss Parker, what would you say is the foundational principle?" Put on the spot, I considered the politically expedient answer the one that would align with Richard's. But looking at Martin, remembering our brief interaction in the lobby, I could not bring myself to be anything but honest. "I believe it should be integrity," I said, aware of Richard's sharp glance in my direction. "Excellence matters, of course, but without integrity, as its foundation, excellence can become merely technical proficiency without moral compass." A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard's face had darkened considerably, and I knew I would pay for this deviation from the script later. But something about Martin's steady gaze made the potential consequences seem less important than speaking my truth in this moment. "Integrity," Martin repeated thoughtfully. "An interesting perspective." He looked around the table. "And the rest of you? Do you align with Mr. Hayes's view of excellence, or Miss Parker's emphasis on integrity?" The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly uncertain which answer would please the potential client more. In the end, most murmured agreement with Richard's position, while a few attempted to bridge both concepts with diplomatic non-answers. Martin observed this display with the same inscrutable expression he had maintained throughout most of the meeting. Then, without warning, he closed the portfolio in front of him and folded his hands on the table. "I believe I have seen enough," he said quietly. The atmosphere in the conference room instantly shifted from uncomfortable to tense. Richard's smile faltered slightly before he recovered. "Of course we have covered a great deal of information," Richard said smoothly. "Perhaps you would like some time to review our materials before we discuss next steps." Martin shook his head slowly. "That will not be necessary, Mr. Hayes." He straightened in his chair and somehow seemed to grow more commanding, without changing his posture. "Allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Martin Reeves, founder and CEO of Reeves Enterprises." I watched Richard's face, seeing the momentary confusion followed by the professional mask sliding back into place. Clearly he had known the client's name, but had never seen his face before today. "For the past month," Martin continued, "I have been working as a janitor in various buildings that house financial firms I have been considering for investment management." A ripple of shocked murmurs circulated around the table. Graham Wilson, our CEO, leaned forward with an expression of disbelief. "Working as a janitor? But why would someone of your—" Graham trailed off, perhaps realizing how his question would sound. "Someone of my wealth," Martin finished for him, a slight edge creeping into his previously neutral tone. "That is precisely why, Mr. Wilson. In my experience, you can tell the character of an organization not by how they treat their equals or superiors, but by how they treat those they perceive as beneath them." Richard's face had drained of color, his eyes darting briefly to me as the implications of this revelation sank in. "Mr. Reeves," he began, his voice taking on an apologetic tone I had never heard him use before. "If there has been some misunderstanding regarding our firm's values or treatment of staff, I assure you that Hamilton and Reed has the utmost respect for all individuals, regardless of their position." Martin's gaze hardened. "Is that so, Mr. Hayes? Because not 20 minutes ago you openly mocked Miss Parker for taking time to assist someone you believed was just a janitor. You implied that common courtesy toward service staff was not worth the potential delay to a lucrative business deal." The room had gone deathly quiet. Sandra Mitchell was staring fixedly at the table. Thomas Chen looked as though he desperately wished to be anywhere else. "That was—" Richard fumbled for words. A rarity for someone usually so articulate. "That was simply a moment of frustration, not reflective of our true values." We have the greatest respect for all the hardworking individuals who maintain our facilities." And yet Martin continued, as if Richard had not spoken. "In the 4 weeks I have worked in this building, Miss Parker was the only executive who ever acknowledged me as a human being. The only one who looked me in the eye when passing in the hallway. The only one who said, 'Thank you,' when I held the elevator door. And today, the only one who stopped to help when I needed assistance." My mind flashed back to the occasions I had seen Martin in the building, never realizing his true identity. Small moments of basic courtesy that apparently had registered significantly with him. "Miss Parker was late to your meeting because she was helping me," Martin said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "And rather than recognizing this as a demonstration of character, you chose to humiliate her in front of her colleagues. You turned compassion into a punchline." Richard was visibly sweating now. "Mr. Reeves, please understand that in the high-pressure environment of finance, we sometimes speak hastily. My comments were never meant to suggest that helping others is not valuable. We are, in fact, deeply committed to community service through our corporate social responsibility programs." "Corporate social responsibility programs." Martin repeated his tone, making the phrase sound hollow. "Impressive initiatives on paper, no doubt. But true character is revealed in small daily interactions, not in grand charitable gestures designed for public relations purposes." He turned his attention directly to me. "Miss Parker, you are the only person in this room I am interested in talking to further about managing my investments." The shock around the table was palpable. Richard looked as though he had been physically struck. "Mr. Reeves," Richard attempted again, desperation creeping into his voice. "While Miss Parker is certainly a valuable member of our team, I assure you that our senior investment strategists have decades more experience managing portfolios of your magnitude." Martin did not even glance in Richard's direction. Instead, he reached for the contract that had been placed before him earlier, sliding it back into his briefcase. "Experience is valuable," Martin acknowledged, still looking at me rather than Richard, "but not as valuable as integrity. Not as important as recognizing the humanity in everyone regardless of their position or what they can do for you." Richard's face had gone from pale to ashen. $200 million, the accompanying commissions, and possibly his year-end bonus were all vanishing before his eyes. "Surely we can discuss this further," Graham Wilson interjected, finally finding his voice. "Hamilton and Reed has a long history of serving clients like yourself with distinction." "Clients like myself?" Martin raised an eyebrow. "You mean wealthy ones? The problem, Mr. Wilson, is that you and your team see me as merely a portfolio to be managed, a commission to be earned. Miss Parker saw me as a person when I was dressed in a janitor's uniform. That speaks volumes about the values at work in your organization." He closed his briefcase with a decisive click and stood up. "Miss Parker, would you be willing to continue our discussion privately? I believe we have much to talk about regarding investment philosophy and ethical approaches to wealth management." Before I could respond, Richard stepped forward, his professional demeanor cracking under the pressure of watching a massive deal slipping away. "This is absurd," he said, his voice tight, with barely controlled anger. "You would base a $200 million investment decision on a trivial interaction in the lobby, on the fact that Miss Parker was unprofessional enough to be late to our meeting." The moment the words left his mouth, Richard seemed to realize his mistake. Martin turned slowly to face him directly for the first time. "Yes, Mr. Hayes, that is exactly what I would do. Because how we treat people when we think it does not matter reveals who we truly are. And I only entrust my wealth to people whose values align with mine." Martin's voice was quiet, but carried immense authority. "Your reaction just now only confirms that I have made the right assessment." Martin turned back to me. "Shall we, Miss Parker?" Still processing the extraordinary turn of events, I stood up, nodding. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. We can use one of the smaller conference rooms." As we walked toward the door, the silence in the room was absolute. I could feel the stares of my colleagues burning into my back, a mixture of shock, envy, and in Richard's case, undisguised fury. Just before we exited, Martin turned back to address the room one final time. "Gentlemen, ladies, I want to thank you for your time and your remarkably educational presentation. It has indeed helped me make an important decision today, though perhaps not the one you had anticipated." With that, we left the conference room, leaving behind a group of executives whose expressions ranged from stunned disbelief to simmering rage. As the door closed behind us, I heard Richard's voice already rising in anger, looking for someone to blame for this catastrophic turn of events. Martin glanced at me as we walked down the hallway. "I suspect your afternoon is about to become rather complicated, Miss Parker." It was the understatement of the year. The smaller conference room offered a stark contrast to the grandiose space we had just left. Without the panoramic views and imposing mahogany table, it felt more conducive to an honest conversation. Martin set his briefcase down and loosened his tie slightly, the formal demeanor he had maintained during the presentation, softening around the edges. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs. "And call me Martin. I think we are well past formalities at this point." I sat down, still trying to process the extraordinary sequence of events. "I should apologize for not recognizing you earlier," I said, feeling somewhat foolish, though I suppose that was rather the point. Martin smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him. "No apology necessary. In fact, your failure to recognize me is precisely why we are having this conversation now. If you had known who I was in the lobby, your actions might have been motivated by self-interest rather than simple kindness." He settled into a chair across from me. "Over the years, I have developed what my staff calls the janitor test. Before making any significant business partnership, I spend time as a maintenance worker in their environment. You would be amazed what you learn about an organization when people think you are invisible." "That is unconventional," I said, unable to hide my surprise. "So, I have been told," Martin agreed with a small laugh. "But I learned the value of this approach early in my career. 30 years ago, I was negotiating with a manufacturing company for my first major acquisition. Their CEO was charming, their financials impeccable. But on a facility tour, I observed how the executives treated their factory workers with contempt. 6 months after I declined to do business with them, a major scandal broke about their labor practices." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "You see, Miss Parker?" "Lynn, please," I interjected. "Lynn," he corrected with a nod. "You see, balance sheets and profit projections can be manipulated. Corporate value statements can be crafted by public relations teams. But how people behave when they think no one important is watching, that cannot be faked." His words resonated deeply with my own growing discomfort about Hamilton and Reed's culture. For years, I had compartmentalized, separating my personal values from the cutthroat environment I worked in. Martin's test had exposed the contradictions I had been living with. "So, you have been working as a janitor here for 4 weeks, Martin confirmed. "Long enough to observe patterns rather than isolated incidents. I have performed the same experiment at 3 other financial institutions I was considering." "And what did you find?" I asked, genuinely curious. Martin sighed. "Disappointing but not surprising results. At one firm, an executive spilled coffee and simply walked away, leaving the mess for someone else to clean up. At another, I overheard senior managers mocking clients as soon as they left the room. But here at Hamilton and Reed," he shook his head, "the casual disregard for anyone deemed unimportant was perhaps the most pervasive. A wave of shame washed over me, not for my own actions, but for being part of such a culture. I wish I could say you are wrong." "Which brings me to my proposition," Martin said, his tone shifting to one of business. "I am indeed looking for new management for a $200 million portfolio. But I am also looking for someone to head a new division within Reeves Enterprises, focused on ethical investing." I blinked in surprise. "And you think that person should be me? Based on one interaction in a lobby?" "Based on that interaction juxtaposed against the behavior of your colleagues," Martin clarified. "And based on what I observed during your portion of the presentation when you spoke about aligning profit with principles. You seem to be the only person in that room who truly believed in what you were saying." He pulled a business card from his pocket and slid it across the table to me. I would like you to consider joining Reeves Enterprises. The position would involve building an investment division from the ground up with full autonomy to implement the ethical framework you outlined in your presentation. The compensation package would be competitive. My mind raced. Was I really being offered a career-changing opportunity? Because I had stopped to help someone pick up cleaning supplies? This is unexpected, I managed. I would need time to consider such a significant change. Of course, Martin nodded. Take a week to think it over. Call the number on the card when you have made your decision. Our conversation continued for another 30 minutes with Martin sharing more about his business philosophy and vision for the ethical investing division. Throughout, I was struck by the contrast between his approach and what I had grown accustomed to at Hamilton and Reed. He spoke of long-term sustainability over short-term profits of community impact alongside shareholder returns. When we finally concluded our discussion, Martin shook my hand firmly. Regardless of your decision, Lynn, thank you for restoring a bit of my faith in the financial sector today. As he left, I remained in the conference room for several minutes, turning his business card over in my hands, contemplating the unexpected crossroads I suddenly found myself at. The respite was short-lived. When I finally returned to my office, Richard was waiting, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. As soon as I closed the door. "Did you know who he was? Was this some kind of setup?" "No, Richard. I had no idea," I replied calmly, finding myself strangely unintimidated by his anger. "I genuinely was just helping someone I thought was a janitor." "Do you have any concept of what you have done?" $200 million, Lynn. The commissions alone would have set up the entire team for the year. My bonus. He cut himself off, perhaps realizing how revealing that particular concern was. I did not do anything except treat another human being with basic decency, I said, my own anger beginning to rise. If that cost us the deal, perhaps that says more about our firm's culture than it does about my actions. Richard's eyes widened in disbelief. Our culture. Our culture is excellence. Our culture is doing whatever it takes to win. If you cannot understand that, maybe you are in the wrong industry. Maybe I am. I agreed, surprising both Richard and myself with the admission. Or maybe the industry needs to change. "Oh, spare me, the sanctimonious lecture," Richard spat. "Did he offer you a position? Is that what your little private meeting was about? You are planning to take our client and walk out the door." Before I could respond, my office phone rang. The display showed it was Graham Wilson, our CEO. "Wilson wants to see us both." Now, Richard said, already moving toward the door. "Try not to sabotage anything else on the way to his office." The elevator ride to the executive floor was tense and silent. Richard stood rigidly staring at the floor numbers as they ascended, while I found myself oddly calm. Something fundamental had shifted for me today. The opinions and approval of people like Richard suddenly seemed less important than they had just hours before. As we approached Graham Wilson's office, I could see through the glass walls that several other executives were already gathered there, including Sandra Mitchell and Thomas Chen. Their expressions were grim, and the atmosphere was reminiscent of the aftermath of a natural disaster, with everyone assessing the damage and looking for someone to blame. Richard squared his shoulders, putting on what I recognized as his damage control face, the one he used when explaining away investment losses or strategic missteps. Whatever happened next, I knew with certainty that in his version of events, I would be cast as the villain of this story. And strangely enough, I found I did not care. Graham Wilson's office epitomized corporate power. Situated in the corner of the building with windows on two sides, it offered expansive views of both Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. Original artwork adorned the walls, and a massive desk of polished black granite dominated the space. Behind it, Graham sat with his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. "Richard Lynn, please sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. The other executives were arranged on sofas and chairs around the perimeter of the room, like an audience awaiting a performance. As soon as we were seated, Richard launched into his version of events. "Graham, what happened today was completely unprecedented, and frankly unfair. Reeves set us up with this janitor charade. How are we supposed to know? He was testing us. The loss of this deal cannot possibly be attributed to our team's performance. Graham held up a hand, silencing Richard mid-sentence. I am already aware of the circumstances, Richard. I received a call from Martin Reeves 15 minutes ago. Richard's expression flickered between hope and apprehension. Then you understand that this was an elaborate setup designed to make us look bad. No financial firm could have anticipated or prepared for such an unorthodox approach. Actually, Graham replied, his voice measured. Reeves was quite clear that his methods, while unusual, revealed exactly what he needed to know about potential partners. And based on what he observed at Hamilton and Reed, he has decided not to entrust his $200 million portfolio to us. Richard's face flushed. Because of a trivial interaction in the lobby, because Lynn decided playing Good Samaritan was more important than our client presentation, she should be held accountable for this catastrophic loss. I prepared to defend myself, but to my surprise, Graham again held up his hand. That is not quite accurate, Richard. In fact, Mr. Reeves specifically cited your reaction to Lynn's tardiness as the primary reason for his decision. He found your mockery of basic human kindness troubling and indicative of values that do not align with his own. The room fell silent as Richard absorbed this information. The other executives shifted uncomfortably, perhaps reconsidering their own laughter during the earlier meeting. However, Graham continued. Mr. Reeves did express interest in doing business with Hamilton and Reed, under one specific condition. Richard leaned forward eagerly. What condition? Whatever it is, we can accommodate it. The condition, Graham said, looking directly at me, is that Lynn Parker be placed in charge of managing his portfolio with full autonomy and a direct reporting line to me, bypassing normal management channels. The shock in the room was palpable. Richard's mouth actually fell open. That is completely unacceptable, he sputtered once he recovered his voice. Lynn does not have the experience or seniority for that level of responsibility. It would undermine our entire organizational structure. Nevertheless, those are his terms, Graham replied calmly. $200 million with the strong implication of more to follow if the relationship proves successful. And if we refuse? Richard challenged. Then he takes his business elsewhere, Graham said simply. Possibly to whatever firm Lynn joins next, as he also mentioned offering her a position at Reeves Enterprises. All eyes in the room turned to me. I felt a strange sense of calm despite being the center of this corporate drama. Did he offer you a job? Richard demanded, his voice tight with accusation. I met his gaze steadily. Yes, he did. To head a new ethical investing division at Reeves Enterprises. And you were planning to take it. To walk out with our client. The betrayal in Richard's voice would have affected me once. Now it just seemed hypocritical coming from someone who had routinely taken credit for his team's work. I told him I needed time to consider it, I replied honestly. I have been with Hamilton and Reed for 8 years, Richard. That counts for something, at least to me. Graham cleared his throat. Well, I would like to make that decision easier for you, Lynn. Hamilton and Reed would be honored to have you lead the Reeves account as a newly created Senior Vice President of Ethical Investing. The position would come with appropriate compensation adjustments and the autonomy Mr. Reeves requested. Richard stood up abruptly. This is absurd. You are rewarding insubordination and undermining my authority. If she gets this promotion, what message does that send to the rest of the team? Perhaps Graham suggested quietly exactly the message we need to send. That character and integrity matter. That how we treat people, all people, reflects who we are as an organization. He turned to address the other executives. Martin Reeves' test revealed something important about our company culture. Something we need to address. If a billionaire client had to disguise himself as a janitor to be treated with basic human dignity in our building, we have lost our way. The room was silent as the weight of this statement sank in. Some looked thoughtful, others uncomfortable, but no one contradicted Graham's assessment. Richard Graham continued, You will transition your current projects to Thomas over the next 2 weeks. After that, we would like you to head our office in Minneapolis. The effective demotion was clear to everyone. The Minneapolis office was a small satellite operation, handling regional accounts far from the prestige and power of the New York headquarters. Minneapolis Richard repeated his voice, hollow with disbelief. Because of one meeting, one client. Because Graham replied firmly, this incident has brought to light leadership and cultural issues that have apparently been festering for some time. We need changes, Richard, and they will begin today. 6 months later, I sat in my new office, reviewing the quarterly performance of the Reeves portfolio. The ethical investing division I now headed had expanded beyond a single client to include 15 major accounts, all attracted by our commitment to aligning profit with principle. The changes at Hamilton and Reed had been substantial and occasionally painful. Some executives, unable to adapt to the cultural shift Graham had mandated, had left for other firms. Others had surprised me with their capacity for growth and self-reflection. Thomas Chen, once Richard's ally in mockery, had become one of my strongest supporters and collaborators. Most surprising of all was my friendship with Martin Reeves. What had begun as a professional relationship had evolved into genuine mentorship. We met monthly for lunch, discussing everything from investment strategies to philosophical questions about wealth and responsibility. His guidance had been invaluable as I navigated my new leadership role. The true measure of success, Martin had told me during our most recent meeting, is not what you accumulate but what you contribute. Not just financially, but in how you influence the people and systems around you. I had taken those words to heart, working to transform, not just my division, but the broader culture at Hamilton and Reed. We had implemented a comprehensive review of our hiring and promotion practices, focusing on character alongside credentials. We had revised compensation structures to reward collaboration rather than cutthroat competition. Most symbolically, perhaps we had instituted a simple policy requiring all employees from executives to interns to learn the names of our maintenance and support staff. The journey had not been easy. There had been resistance and setbacks along the way. But watching the transformation unfold, seeing the impact of prioritizing humanity in an industry often criticized for its lack thereof, had been profoundly rewarding. My office phone buzzed, interrupting my reflection. My assistant's voice came through the speaker. Your 3 o'clock is here, and Martin Reeves called to confirm your lunch meeting tomorrow. Thank you, Janet, I replied. Send my 3 o'clock in. As I prepared to greet my next appointment, I thought about how a single moment, a simple choice to help someone in need, had altered the trajectory of my career and my life. I had learned that success comes not just from what you achieve, but from how you treat people along the way. That integrity, when tested, reveals character in ways that credentials and accomplishments cannot. In a world that often celebrates wealth and status above all else, I had discovered that recognizing the humanity in everyone regardless of their position was not just morally right, but professionally valuable. That kindness and success need not be opposing forces. And that standing firm in your values, even when inconvenient or unpopular, can lead to opportunities and relationships you never imagined possible. Have you ever stood up for your values when it was difficult or inconvenient? How did it change your path? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to see more content like this, and share with someone who might need this reminder that kindness matters even in the most competitive environments. Thank you for watching, and remember that the small choices we make every day define who we are more than the grand gestures everyone sees.